All right, welcome everyone. This is our final day press conference with First Nations leaders, giving them time and space to respond to the Bill C5 summit that concluded today. So we have a list of speakers. We are going to begin with AMC Grand Chief Kyra Wilson, and then I will announce each of the other speakers as they come up.
Hello. We're good? Okay. Good evening. Sorry, I'm just thinking, what time is it right now? It's been a long day. So my name is Kyra Wilson, Grand Chief for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. I just want to say thank you to the leadership that is here today. It has been a long day of conversations with the Prime Minister as well as cabinet ministers and many leadership from across the country, and it's been an interesting day to say the least. We've heard from many nations, of course, which is the most important part of the discussions that happened in the last 2 days. We, of course, as First Nations, needed to ensure that our voices are being heard, and there's a clear message that we've heard, or that I've heard, today, but also yesterday as well, is that we are calling for honesty and transparency in all discussions when it comes to this country. As the First Peoples of the land and territories that we see in this country, we need to be a part of these conversations. And I understand that Canada has talked about, an issue of national security, and these major projects are going to address that. And these major projects are of national interest. And what we've heard today is that, what is the issue? What is national security? As First Nations, we need to be a part of these conversations. Our people have fought in the front lines of the wars of this country, and we need to be acknowledged and respected. And we have many asks and many demands when it comes to this process. If we are talking about major projects, what are we currently dealing with today? Yes, there are future projects that we can discuss. Of course, today was not about consultation. Today was going to be the first meetings of many. That is the expectation from Canada. And when we think about the consent of these major projects, we also need to have rights of refusal. We need to be able to say no. And that was one of the questions that we asked today. What is your response going to be if a nation says no to any major project within their region or in their territory? And so major projects, resource extraction, this is a conversation, and we're not against development, but not at the expense of our waters and our lands. And that is also a clear message that we have shared with Canada today, is that we are always going to protect the waters and the lands and ensure that the lands and waters are there for future generations. And we see resource extraction today. We see Canada and the provinces benefiting from resources that are being extracted from our lands and territories. And we need to also see the benefit from, the financial benefit, from what is happening today. And we don't as First Nations. We are stricken with poverty in our nation. So, that is one of the things that we, or I shouldn't say we, that I've heard today. And just thinking about, there's so many thoughts that are going through my mind right now about the message. We've also heard, that Section 35, there needs to be a framework that is defining First Nations rights within that piece of legislation. We need to hear from Canada how they're going to respect and recognize our our laws, the laws that we create, the standards and regulations that we create in this process. What is that going to look like? And there's so many questions, and I'll leave that to leadership to speak about. But what I will say is that this meeting was not consultation. This meeting was a discussion, and it's going to be a discussion of many. That is the expectation going forward. And so I acknowledge our leadership that we're at the table today. Thank you very much for being there for our nations. Thank you for standing up for our nations and our families. And I just want to say Chimiigwech to our leadership that are here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Grand Chief. Next, we are going to hear from Grand Chief Brian Hardlotte from Prince Albert Grand Council.
Thank you very much. I acknowledge all of you here. And I am proud to be standing up here in unity with the Manitoba Chiefs. Interesting day with the discussions. I wouldn't call them really a consultation. I think the consultation happens before anything, development, or even in this case, legislation. I didn't get the opportunity, but I had the opportunity to ask Minister LeBlanc, what's the next step with the provinces, with us in our region, Saskatchewan. There will be another meeting, because we all know the three provinces with the NRTA Act, and it's really the provinces that control, that they say that they control the natural resources. So that was a question that he said that they talked about. So in our case, this past spring, Premier Scott Moe pre-approved the pipeline going through our traditional territory. So, my name is Brian Hardlotte, and Grand Chief of the Prince Albert Grand Council. Last week, the chiefs from the Prince Albert Grand Council had a meeting to discuss Bill C-5, and the Prince Albert Grand Council chiefs are very, very apprehensive with the Bill C-5, and that they say it undermines treaty rights and Indigenous sovereignty. And the First Nations of the Prince Albert Grand Council raising the alarm of Bill C-5, where that legislation represents a direct threat to Indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights and long-standing responsibilities under the international law. I'll just highlight some of the things that were discussed in that meeting. The issue was front and center during this meeting. This was on July 10th, and it was the chiefs of the Prince Albert Grand Council, the executive, senators, elders, and also representatives of the Women's Commission. Women's Commission were in this meeting to discuss the implications of the Free Trade, Labour Mobility in Canada Act, and also the Building Canada Act, collectively known as Bill C-5. But one of the comments sitting right here, Chief Marcel had, Shoal Cree Nation, said that it's the time for reaction is over, and he called on all First Nations to assert their economic sovereignty and jurisdiction, not just in principle but in practice. And the chief is doing that by signing an agreement here this week to do with biomass. We spent too long responding after the fact that he had said in that press release. We are now asserting our right. Shoal Lake is engaging with industry, directly claiming what has always been theirs, and that's the land and the resources. One of the chiefs from the Denny Nation also highlighted past ongoing and environmental harm in northern Saskatchewan as a warning of what can happen when governments and corporations act without Indigenous oversight. And the Dene chief cited the long-standing contamination in Uranium City, where 27 abandoned mine sites were recently transferred to the province without proper remediation. And they opposed, the Dene Nations opposed the handover because the lakes are still polluted and unsafe. And that was Chief Ronnie Auger from Fond du Lac, Dene Nation. In that contamination and unsafe waters, there's no signs, warnings, people not to drink or fish in those waters. And that's the legacy. And that's the legacy with the mines, abandoned mines, that they have extracted everything. Now they're gone, but they left all that mess. Chief Zachary Whitecap of the Red Earth Cree Nation referring lessons passed down by elders and said First Nations must no longer be caught off guard by federal decisions made behind closed doors. And far too long we've been kept in the dark while decisions are made without us. That chief had said that, Chief Whitecap. And we need to move from silence to strategy. And that has to start now. And one of our senators, Senator Charles Whitecap, underscored the need to focus inward and rebuild foundational systems. To implement the treaty and treaty rights, we must first focus on who we are as nations, our identity, language, governance, laws, and we can't keep reacting to legislation that was never meant for us. And we must build our own systems and implementation and a nation-to-nation relationship. Also very important here, James Burns from James Smith Cree Nation reminded everyone in that meeting, and I heard that today, that that the treaties were not land sales, but agreements to share the land. And that he said we never surrendered our title to the land and resources, and we were never defeated, he said, Senator Burns. The Queen herself said that she didn't have enough money to buy this land, so it remains ours. All that's in it, the minerals and the water, everything. So that was a release that we did last week, some of the highlights. I want to conclude, if I can, and I thank the media, and we trust you to do a good story on this. The NRTA, and for many years, as Western Alliance nations, we've been working on this for many, many years, and leaders even before us worked on it. There has to be revenue sharing. There has to be. A lot of these, what the discussion was, how they presented their legislation, their law, Bill C-5, it sounds so good, but I think it supports capitalism, and people will get rich, other people, there will be jobs, and hopefully those partnerships are there, but if not, if the partnerships are there has to be revenue sharing. And I didn't hear a response to a question or a comment that National Chief Mercury asked, and that's to rescind the National Resource Transfer Act. I'll end with this, media. Our people are hunters, gatherers, fishers, trappers, and these are treaty rights. And because of the NRTA, these rights have been eroded and violated. And all the injustices that have been done to our people suffered because of this legislation, the NRTA. Our people have always been self-sufficient, and that's thanks to the traditional industries. What are the traditional industries I talk about? Trapping. Our people build this country because of this industry. Today, trapping is dying. It's neat because there's no support from the two levels of government. Commercial fishing. Many of our people are inland commercial fishermen, but today they struggle. They need that freedom in trade to sell their product, to sell their fish. They have that right. The treaty fishers that I represent, I speak for, need a form of FFMC, that's Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation, to continue with their livelihood. And those were my comments. You know, today our western provinces, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, are burning. And all that resource, the timber, is burning and displacing our people, our communities. We need the resources from both levels of government to give us those resources, to train our people, to be able to train our people, to suppress, to fight those fires, to protect our communities. And we need that. Thank you very much for listening to me here this evening. God bless you.
Thank you, Grand Chief Hardlotte. Next, we have Grand Chief from Manitoba, Keewatinowi, Okimakanak, Grand Chief Garrison, Settee.
Tanse tutemak itsanak niwagumaganak naskumit now kagino niwagumaganak naskumit. Thank you, Rich Chief. Thank you. We have a lot to ponder and a lot to think about as we go forward. After we've been summoned to the nation's capital and listened to a presentation on a legislation that was fast-tracked and approved, passed through Parliament without our input, without our consultation. So we came here to the nation's capital as representatives of our people, the people we care for, and the people that entrusted us to be their voice at the national level. And we came in a position of strength and power because we realize that our treaties are still legally binding and our inherent rights are still in effect. Inherent rights that we had prior to European contact. Those rights are never diminished, have never eroded. They still stand as strong as ever because it is our people that invoke those treaties and those rights. We continue to evoke them because they are powerful. So I'm thankful that we had a chance to work together. It's like my colleagues that are sitting here, we worked together to make sure that what was presented was responded to with how we see the future for our people. And the Prime Minister said in one of his comments at the beginning that trust begins with facts and partnership. And that's something that he has asked us to do, to trust him. To trust him that he will honor those words that he spoke to us on really, I guess, facilitating a process of consultation that will be ratified by our people. So consultation was a word that I heard a few times. And there was asked at our table, what is meaningful consultation to us? And I said, meaningful consultation is when Our treaties are part of the equation. And it's hard to trust any government after 150 years of broken treaties and broken promises. It's hard to trust a government. And I'm not talking about just the current government. I'm talking about previous governments, be it any party that is voted in. They always have their first interest. Their priorities are about their government first. So my suggestion was this relationship has to be reset the way it was originally intended from the beginning when we signed our treaties, to mutually benefit from the land and its resources, to share the wealth, to share the proceeds of any development project in our territories. And when we talk about consultation, the duty to consult, they stop there, but they never talk about accommodation. And that's what I wanted to hear, accommodation. What is the process of accommodation when a project begins in our territory? What kind of percentage of revenue sharing will we acquire, will be given to us? Those questions remain unanswered. So we will continue to sit. We will continue to sit until we hear with clarity what our First Nations will get out of this project. And I'm thankful that we have so many powerful leaders that have spoke this afternoon from Saskatchewan and from here in Ontario, and also some of our former national chiefs that were there. They spoke well, and they spoke with power and strength. And I'm very, very confident that we'll continue to move forward, holding the government accountable of the words they spoke today, so that they will not be hollow promises or just mere words. We will hold them accountable until we see the proper consultation and also accommodation. So it's a challenge that lies before us, but I'm confident our people will no longer be left out of the wealth and prosperity of any project in this country. I am confident. Tegusanik, inanas commit now.
Thank you, Grand Chief Settee. Now we have a strong female chief from the north up next, Chief Angela Levasseur from Nisichawayasihk Cree Nation.
Danse, and good evening. My name is Chief Angela Levasseur. I am the first female to be elected chief of the colonial chief and council system. I come from a long line of matriarchs that governed the north, that governed Manitoba long before contact. So I must preface that by saying I'm the first quote-unquote colonial chief that is a female. I'm honored to be speaking here today. I have a lot to say on Bill C-5 and the meetings of the past 2 days, but for the sake of expediency, I will keep it short. Historically, Canada and First Nations have been engaged in an abusive relationship. Much like abusive domestic partner relationships, things started off okay in the beginning, as my Grand Chief Garrison Settee alluded to. When the colonizer came across the ocean, we took care of them, we fed them. They were sick, we nursed them back to health. We agreed to share, not give, to share our lands and resources. And instead, even though we signed treaties that put into writing, English, might I add, what the terms were of this relationship, those promises were soon broken. Those promises continue to be broken. And the relationship has been toxic and abusive for over 500 years. Just like a domestic partner who is told, I'm sorry that I hurt you, it won't happen again. This is the type of discourse that chiefs and grand chiefs are subjected to. This is going to be different. This is going to be a new relationship. Things have changed, new government. We're tired of hearing that because really nothing has changed. And this is why I'm very skeptical, because the relationship First Nations have been engaged in with Canada has been characterized by lies, broken promises, literal violence, and other harms. If you are a good relative or you are a good partner, you don't allow your partner to starve and suffer. You don't allow their children to go hungry. You don't destroy the lifeblood that is their land and their water. You don't destroy everything that they hold sacred. Today, Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke about trust and hope. I thought a lot about what the Prime Minister had to say. And when I think about this relationship that First Nations are engaged in with Canada and the history of our relationship, the history of lies, the history of violence, the history of broken promises, this makes trust hard, Prime Minister Carney. I would love nothing more as a First Nations chief to say that I trust you or that I can trust you. But as you said today, Prime Minister, today was not consultation. Today was merely engagement, as was yesterday. Don't even consider it a blind date, Prime Minister. You're just getting to meet us and getting to know us as First Nations chiefs and Grand Chiefs, and forming a healthy and mutually respectful relationship is going to be a long, hard road. It's going to take a lot of time, and we're going to need to see some serious showings of good faith. And at the risk of sounding redundant, enacting Bill C-5 and passing this legislation without consulting with us or obtaining our consent was not a good start. Another issue that the Prime Minister touched upon was that of hope. Let me tell you, as a female First Nations chief, as a mother of 5 children, as a grandmother who will someday be a great grandmother, hope is something that I think about every day. Hope is something that First Nations people in this country are fast losing. Hope is virtually non-existent. Right now, as I speak these words, 3 wildfires surround my ancestral land, and much of northern Manitoba is burning. The boreal forest that we rely on, all humans, not just First Nations, all human beings rely on to breathe, is being decimated. And it's getting worse year after year after year. This is all the result of climate change. This is the result of environmental degradation. And we're being asked to come to the table to talk about how we can do more destruction and degradation. Is it just me, or does that seem crazy to everyone else as well? There is an abundance of hopelessness and despair in First Nations communities because we don't live in a third world. Let's get this straight. First Nations people in Canada, a G7 country, live in the 4th world. And it's unacceptable. And once again, it's indicative of the unhealthy and abusive relationship that we seem to be stuck in. I'll give you two quick examples of major destruction that has occurred in my ancestral territory of northern Manitoba, not just the Nisichawayasihk Cree Nation, but other First Nations and communities in northern Manitoba. One, perhaps the most damning, was Manitoba Hydro's Churchill River diversion. It flooded the community of South Indian Lake 10 feet underwater. To this day, the sturgeon are facing extinction. The whitefish are in danger of extinction. And a people that were once completely self-sufficient, proud, hard-working individuals who did not rely on the government for anything, including my late grandfather. That has been relegated to a community that is almost entirely reliant on the government for not just transfer payments, but employment income assistance or welfare. Welfare, social assistance, handouts, whatever you want to call it. We never needed this. And it's national projects of interest, like hydro dams and pipelines and mines, that have brought us to this place where we need to rely on the government in order to survive. The second example is the Rutan mine in Leaf Rapids, Manitoba. Many of my relatives and my citizens live in Leaf Rapids. The entire town is evacuated right now while the province and the feds kind of go back and forth over jurisdiction. There is no elected government, which is very convenient, and the people are not being helped. The town itself is in grave danger, and an emergency mandatory evacuation took place recently. The people are all displaced, they're suffering on the streets of Winnipeg, Brandon, Portage la Prairie, wherever. And this community has been on a boiled water advisory for over 20 years because this mine came in under the authorization not of matriarchs like myself, not of First Nations leadership, but by the authority of the provincial government, thanks to the National Resource Transfer Act. They came in, they destroyed, and they left a big mess and more tailings than you can shake a stick at. There was a time that our elders told us that one day we would pay for water. That was what they told our ancestors, and our ancestors found that concept to be incredulous. Why would we pay for water? Because clean, fresh drinking water was in absolute abundance all throughout Turtle Island, and especially in northern Manitoba. Today, I think it's safe to say that one day wars will be fought over clean drinking water. Make no mistake, our so-called neighbors to the south will be the first ones running up here wanting our water. And it's going to be a sad day. One day, no one will be able to breathe. And it won't only be because of all the wildfires. It'll be because we've decimated the boreal forests that we as humans rely on for oxygen, for survival. My final thought on the issue of Bill C-5 is that I have great concern for our First Nations women, our girls, and our Two-Spirit relatives. History has shown us that with big projects and development come man camps. And with these man camps comes copious amounts of sexual violence and gender-based violence being perpetrated against our women, our girls, and our Two-Spirit relatives. This cannot continue. It must be addressed, and it should not be ignored. This is not the first time I have addressed this issue with media, and I'm still waiting to have these words shared with the public, shared with government. As Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and also Indigenous men and boys, we have the right to live. We have the right to feel safe. IWG2S+. No more sexual violence and abuse against our Indigenous people. To conclude, I will quote Cree knowledge keeper Robert Spence of Tataskoya Cree Nation. What we do to the land, we do to ourselves. And that goes for all of us. not just First Nations, all human beings. We're all in this together. And you can't eat money, and you can't breathe money, and you can't drink oil. We have to work together, yes, to improve the conditions of First Nations people in this country called Canada, but we also have to protect Mother Earth. Egosani.
Thank you, Chief Levasseur. Next, we will hear from Chief Kelsey Jacko, Cold Lake First Nation.
Glanite. Thank you for the chiefs for having me here today. It's been a long day. Lots of talks today about what is the national interest and what meaningful consultation with our people look like. Got some answers, got some questions. In my territory, the Pathways Carbon Storage Project will probably apply to be a national interest project. I don't think people understand how big this project is. It's almost the size of New Brunswick. For a project this size, the national interest can just be economic, and we got assurances today that it won't be. But just because the carbon is going somewhere doesn't mean it will stay there. The Pathways projects can't be in the national interest unless they can prove the carbon can stay there in the ground for 1,000 years. That's what the scientists are saying. We need to do to help fight climate change. So that's what I expect. My people will not stand for being a dump yard for industrial waste, especially if it doesn't work. We cannot have poisoned land at the scale and survive as a people. We need the land to practice our culture and our traditions. We need it to sustain our people and the animals, the bugs, and the medicines. We need to be sure the water is safe. We will insist on conditions of water mapping underground and monitoring of the cumulative impacts. So it's kind of hard, you know, if stuff is deemed a national interest, certain acts is going to be ignored. You know, Species at Risk Act. I'm Dene. You know, I'm a caribou people. You know, can you put a cost to that if the caribou was to be gone? You know, like I said before, like we should be the Saudis of Canada. Our people shouldn't be struggling out there. We should have all the needs, housing. We should have places where people are addicted. It's hard, you know, when you talk and your words are unheard. But the Prime Minister said he's going to come to my territory to talk about this. So I'm going to hold him up to it. And I heard that today. So merci trop for having me. I'll just keep it short for now. It's been a long day. Merci.
All right. Thank you, Chief Jacko. Next, we will hear from Chief Marcel Head from Shoal Cree Nation.
I'd like to say good evening to everyone that's present here this evening. You know, when I came here and planning to attend the this summit on Bill C-5, Building Canada Act, we talked about it, you know, back home, and as well as you know, I've been doing my own research as to what the federal government is proposing with this legislation. Shoal Cree Nation has been very proactive in terms of getting involved in the economy within our own province, which is Saskatchewan. I have a good team of experts. I have a team of technical advisors, consultants, legal counsel. And now we're going to be hiring another consulting firm that will highlight what the plans are for our traditional territory. We share a traditional territory that is approximately 1,300 square miles of territory. And we share that with the Red Earth Cree Nation. And, you know, I'm very optimistic about the future in terms of what we have within our traditional territory. In the past 3 or 4 years, we've been voicing out the vision that we have for our community. And this afternoon, and this morning, I told government officials, especially the Prime Minister, I'm not so worried about the legislation. I have no concern over it. And the reason is this, that Shoal Cree Nation wants to demonstrate and also send a strong message to both levels of government, federal and provincial, that we never gave up our land, we never gave up our resources when we signed treaty. That's always been a message when I meet up with prime ministers or any cabinet ministers from the federal government and now the provincial government. Our vision is basically taking back what is rightfully ours, and that's the land and the resources. It is time that Shoal Lake stand up along with Red Earth Cree Nation to take back what is rightfully ours and start benefiting from the resources that have been historically extracted out of our traditional territory. I don't mean to boast, but we do have a very significant amount of resources within our traditional territory, both renewable and as well as natural resources. We also have minerals within that traditional territory. We also have critical minerals within our territory. And we are telling, both levels of government, by taking back what is rightfully ours and going back to the spirit and intent of treaty, and that was specifically to share the land and to share the resources. Do we see that today amongst both levels of government? No. Grand Chief had just mentioned from Manitoba that we are going to be celebrating 150 years this year of Treaty 5. And some of our people, have said, what is there to celebrate? 150 years of oppression, 150 years of depression, and under what is called, and this was forced on us, and that's the Indian Act, as well as being placed and confined into a reserve setting. Legislation, policies have been developed by both levels of government to restrict or handcuff First Nations from participating in the economy. One of our elders have said, the government is suffering today because they did something to First Nations people, and they call it pastawan. It says, to interpret it, a curse is upon the land. Now we can help, he said, change that curse into a blessing by meaningful dialogue in whatever Canada proposes, whatever the Saskatchewan government proposes. We are in dialogue right now. As a matter of fact, we just finished what we call the Forestry Summit, 2 days. First day was just a planning session. But the second day is we invited government officials from the province, as well as industry, and even consultants. And we were embarking on what we call the biomass project. And we seriously believe, that this is just one step of moving forward in what we can do and demonstrate to Canada and our provinces. By allowing First Nations across the country to participate in an economy, and I talked about the spirit and intent of treaty, this time we're going to do it right, and that has been my message to all the prime ministers that I've sat with. Today marks the day of talking to the fourth prime minister, and it was the same, taking back what is rightfully ours, taking back the resources and the land. By doing it right, our message is clear. To honor the spirit and intent of treaty is what we're taking on as a nation. And this time, it's not going to be one entity that's going to benefit from the resources that are going to be extracted out of our traditional territory, but everyone is going to win. I've been talking to both the provincial government, namely our premier, and as well as some of the ministers in Saskatchewan. When I say, that we're going to do it right this time, everyone is going to win this time. For example, this one biomass project. If this project deems profitable, what we put within an agreement, a business plan, how we distribute the profits that come out from that project is going to be equally shared amongst all entities. And we split it amongst a third to 3 entities. First Nations will be receiving 1/3. Industry will receive 1/3. And I told this, to one of the parties at a national level. And I said, the other third would go back to either the federal or the provincial government. But I've been told by my nation, it's up to the Cree Nation to decide how to distribute. But that's just my concept, my idea of how those resources or those benefits or those prosperity can be split. And it's a win-win situation, like I said. This way, we're taking on the role of going back way before the newcomer came, way before the newcomer set foot into our land. They found us being a sovereign nation, having jurisdiction over the lands and the resources. And we exercise that sovereignty, and we exercise that jurisdiction by sharing everything amongst our fellow Indigenous people. That's the way we lived. And that's why our ancestors, when they signed treaty, they made sure that the spirit and intent of treaty identifies the sharing of our land. So today, we're going to rewrite history, and hopefully, that we're very optimistic, that this plan is going to work, and everybody should benefit from it. Shoal Cree Nation is going to lead by example of what we can do in terms of the natural resources, in terms of the resources that we do have. I mentioned at the Assembly, at the summit today, there is 24 identified critical minerals within our province. 7 of them were found within our traditional territory. And this is what we're encouraging all nations across the country, to look back into your backyards of what exists today. And make sure that you tell the provincial government and the federal government that that resource still belongs to you because you never gave them up when we signed treaty. That's our message. And one thing that we tell our people, we're tired of suffering, we're tired of being submissive to a policy called the Indian Act. Once we start seeing the prosperity coming into our nation, we'll eventually move away from the Indian Act and be independent, and be an independent nation, without having to depend on government handouts like we do today. Yes, the profits that are going to be extracted, benefits that are going to be extracted out of our traditional territory, that's what we call, serving our people with programs and services. It doesn't have to come out from the taxpayers. That's the other thing too. We've been accused of being a tax burden in Canada. Well, we take back our land, we take back our resources. Everyone is going to benefit from this. And I hope, Prime Minister, you're listening. Your cabinet ministers, you're listening. Premier Scott Moe, if you're listening. This is our message. We are going to win. Everybody is going to win. Today, I'd like to thank, the organizers for this session and bringing our issues forward. And I thank, the National Chief and the Prime Minister for making this Bill C-5 a good success. I call it a good success, but I think there's a lot that we have to take back home and discuss it amongst our nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Our final speaker is Vice Chief Fabian Head from the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations.
Good evening. First and foremost, as taught by my elders back home in Red Earth, to give thanks to our Creator for this beautiful day that we've been blessed with. I'd like to acknowledge the chiefs here, my Treaty 5 brothers and sisters that are here at this table. I bring greetings on behalf of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. To the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Ministers, today we sat at the museum listening to the presentations, the promises that were made by the Liberal government. But we want to clarify something that is a misconception. First Nations did not cede, surrender, or release our right to the land and the resources. We agreed to share the land, and we didn't give anything away to the rights of the resources we relied upon. The treaties were meant to ensure that our continued survival, not to strip away our rights. Yet today, provincial and federal policies and legislation continue to erode those rights. This was never the intent and the spirit of treaty. The national interest legislation was introduced. It was debated and amended in a matter of weeks, without First Nations at the table, without the proper consultation taking place. We were not given a chance to share our thoughts or recommendations on legislation that fundamentally affects our lands, our rights, our future. The decision made by Canada goes to the very heart of the treaties, our lands and resources and waters. In the throne speech, Canada committed to being a reliable partner to the Indigenous people and committed to reconciliation. We call on Canada today to make the good on that promise, to uphold the honor of the Crown when it comes to the implementation of this far-reaching act. First Nations want to help build build the Canadian and global economy, but what we will not do so at the expense of our rights or the lands and waters that we entrusted to protect. The land is just not, it's just not the economy. It's the source of our language, our culture, our identity, our responsibility to future generations. While the provinces seek to remove barriers between themselves, we've been talking about the inter-nation trade for decades and practicing it for centuries. The Act prioritizing investors' confidence, regulatory streamlining and speed, but at what cost? Fast-tracking projects and bypassing standard assessments threatens environmental protections. Centralizing decision-making in one minister's hand raises deep concerns. Though the Act mentions that First Nation priorities, there's no guarantee that our perspectives will shape or determine those priorities. Nothing in the Act makes our input binding. This framework risks overriding our jurisdiction on lands, waters, and resources. It cannot be simply accepted that we merely consulted with, but we must be full partners in the implementation process. I want to stress that the critical minerals and other resources driving the Canadian economy are being extracted from our treaty and traditional territories. In Saskatchewan, First Nations see little to no benefit from the resource development. In 1930, Canada transferred control over natural resources to the Prairie provinces without our consent, despite our treaty agreement with the Crown. And since then, the province of Saskatchewan has built much of its economy on the resources taken from our territories. Projects pass through our lands, impact our waters, and disrupt our cultural sites. Yet we are left out, and First Nations do not benefit. While resource revenue sharing is becoming more common in Canada, it remains absent in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. You say that Canada wants to ensure that First Nations benefit. How will Canada ensure that will happen? Because in Saskatchewan, every town, city, RM, and the villages benefit from the resources, but the First Nations do not. What does Canada mean by First Nations ownership? Because that is not clear. Does it mean that Canada will loan First Nations money to be paid back? What about those First Nations that don't have the capacity to work on these projects? Will they be left behind? Will they not benefit because of our First Nations' lack of capacity, which is not fault of their own? When Canada's prosperity and wellness is threatened, you act immediately. But our people's prosperity has been threatened since we signed treaty. How do First Nations now trust that we will benefit when many of our nations don't have that capacity to participate in major projects? Given the foregoing, we put forward the following: that a letter of agreement be entered in today which provides, number one, that the inherent and treaty rights of the First Nation will be promoted and protected, and that the protection of the preservation of lands and waters within the First Nation treaty and traditional territories is paramount, so that our citizens can exercise our inherent and treaty right to hunt, fish, trap, and gather, and that the Government of Canada share the wealth that is generated from our treaty and traditional territories through a revenue sharing agreement, with negotiations for such agreement to commence immediately with First Nations. And today we also saw Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution being exercised. We've seen the first portion of it taking place in Alberta with the premiers meeting with the Prime Minister in Alberta.
Thank you, Vice Chief, and that concludes our press conference for today. Thank you to our leadership. We wish you safe travels to your home fires, and for everyone else in the room, safe travels.